Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of Northwest Craftsman. Today we're going to be making a custom throat insert for my table saw. Now, there's a lot of places that you can just purchase a throat insert ready to go that'll be a zero clearance. They're usually made out of a plastic of some kind, and Lee Craft is a pretty good place to get those. And so if you've got a table saw, recommend checking there first because you can literally just insert it, install it, and then run your blade through and you're good to go. But for my particular model, the C10FL, and I think Porter cables are also lumped in with the same, Lee Craft has been out for months now, and I needed to use my dado stack, so I needed to make myself a throat plate insert. So today I'm going to show you guys how to make your own throat plate insert, and we'll go ahead and see how well it works. All right, let's get started. Okay, so your throat plate insert is this guy right here, if you weren't sure what that was, and essentially it provides you a covering for the area where your blade comes out of your table saw so that you can operate it safely. You should never, ever, ever operate a table saw without the throat plate inserted. But the problem is a dado stack is going to be much larger than this zero clearance, and I don't want to widen out my zero clearance insert because I really like having my zero clearance for all of the other cutting that I do. So we're going to basically just duplicate this entire guy right here, and this guy is rigid enough that we're just going to use it as the template. The challenge is you really have two different options. One is to replicate this in its entirety, and so you've got a whole bunch of geometry all the way through here, and it's a much thicker plate, but that's because it goes past the standoffs all the way around. Or, and this would be a little bit easier, is just to make a standoff or to make a plate that is thick enough, or thin enough I should say, that it can sit on top of these standoffs without going inside, and then it's nice and flat across the surface there. I want to try and replicate this thicker one though because it's going to be thicker and more stable, or that's the theory, that it's going to be thicker and more stable, and we'll go ahead and see how well that works, because if all else fails, well, then I can make a thinner one that just sits right on top here. You just have to be a little bit more careful because it's a little bit less dimensionally stable, and it could, if you're pushing on it, have a little bit more give. So the first step that you're going to want to do is go ahead and take your insert that you have right now, if it was the factory made insert or otherwise, take it, and you want to look at the widest portion of it, which is usually going to be that top surface. You notice how almost all the way around on the bottom here there is a little bit of a lip, and so you want to make sure that that top surface is sitting correctly because it will sit all the way along that edge. So I'm taking a sheet of plywood right here, and I basically just want to mark off what the width is, and then I'm just going to rip a strip all the way down here, and I can probably get a couple of templates out of this piece. Alrighty, next up I'm just going to double check that measurement to make sure it matches. And it looks like I'm about a 1/16 of an inch larger on the plywood, which is fine. Let's just go ahead and double check that. It looks like I'm actually a 32nd of an inch smaller on my actual piece than I am on the plywood. But that's actually probably because of the marking the pencil, not the actual mark. So I will bring this guy down just a hair. So another way that you should be able to do this is if you take your insert as it is right here, and as long as your opening for your throat plate is not so large that your throat plate can fall into it, you should be able to line it up right on your fence and then slowly bring it in until it lines up. I'm just going to make sure that this stays flat. Lines up with this top tooth over here. Now you want to make sure that you don't bring it all the way, your blade all the way up, because one of the problems you run into is that sometimes your teeth actually stick out slightly wider than the main body of the blade. So you want to make sure that you're hitting one of your teeth, and if you've got an alternating tooth set, you want to make sure that your tooth that is on this side, on the side that your throat plate is on, is meeting it right there. And so you can just tap it into place until you meet it just even, like that, and you can test it. So I've got just barely any contact right there. Lock down your fence and you should be good to go. Okay, and with that all measured out, let's go ahead and reinstall our old throat plate so that we can get this guy cut, and then we'll start working with it. And actually, before I get started, one of the tips that I had seen online when you're cutting plywood, for this case it doesn't really matter cosmetically, but one of the things that I had seen is you actually want to raise your blade up pretty high so that when the blade is coming down on your plywood, it is in a more downward direction, rather than what you would normally do, which is just keep it barely even with the surface, because then you're going to end up slicing a lot of that and you can get a lot of splintering off of your plywood. So if you see me raise this up all the way, that's why I'm doing it on plywood. You just have to be very careful of fingers and everything else because you now have a large spinning blade sitting above your surface. Alrighty, then before we get back to work, make sure to unplug it so that you are working safely. So this looks and feels good right here. Next step that I'm going to do is go ahead and trace this rounded edge over here, and then I'm going to quickly cut that out so that I have a blank that is the thickness and the correct shape, but doesn't have any of this geometry on the bottom. So as a note, when you can see how far out this guy is, this is a perfect application for either your miter gauge or for a crosscut sled. I did just make myself a crosscut sled for this table saw, so I'm going to go ahead and use that guy. If you haven't seen how to make a crosscut sled for your table saw, go ahead and check out the link up in one of these corners right here. Alrighty, now that we have this guy rough cut right here and we only have those corners that we need to get rid of, I'm going to go ahead and take it over to the bandsaw and get the bulk of the material trimmed off around there. And I am actually going to skip the tabs here because I've thought of a different way that I can do that if that becomes an issue later. Those tabs are really just used to keep that backside from flipping up because we will have a screw on this side of that throat plate. But let's go ahead and get this bulk trimmed off, and then we'll go ahead and use an orbital sander to get it nice and tight. If you have a drum sander or a sander that's, I can't even remember what the correct name for it is, but a sander that's on a stand so that you can just run it up against it. Those guys are really handy for this, but all I have is an orbital sander to just get it right down to that line, and then we'll do test fits while we're doing that. And there we go, with a little bit of fine tuning, it fits in there just perfectly and isn't moving around at all. So you really want to make sure that you get a pretty good tight fit around here. If you miss one spot or two spots, it's not really a big deal because you should have pretty good contact all the way around, but you really want to make sure that this is a pretty tight fit because this is going to help it stay put when you're cutting with it. But you'll now notice we are proud, like we had said we were going to be earlier, because we're sitting off of these supports right here. So now what we need to do is get the pattern from the bottom of this guy traced out so that we can figure out what we need to cut off of him. And another thing that I was figuring out, or another thing that I was checking, is I had said at the beginning I needed to be worried about the table saw coming up and hitting the bottom side of our throat plate. Well, I checked the thickness of this, and it's basically just a hair under a ½ inch, and the ½ inch stock is also just a hair under a ½ inch. So you can see they are pretty much identical to each other, so I am not worried about this guy interfacing with the saw any differently than this one would right here. Okay, so when I was marking out each one of these different holes, this is going to be the through hole for the finger. These two are going to be adjustment areas, and this is actually where it's going to set up on top here. You could, if I put a through hole over here, adjust these screws that are over in the throat, except I don't want to do that because this throat plate right here sits flush already, and so I'd rather make this sit flush over there rather than change those around and mess up this. So what I did, because you can't necessarily just stack these on top of each other, otherwise you'll get a mirror image, you saw me mark on the edge where the inlets are and then how deep they go at each one of those different points. Each one of these, from what I'm seeing, just needs to be rough all the way around. So I will draw a straight line through there, but there will be a radius. And then I'll do another straight line over here for this one, but these corners will be radiused as well. Now, it gets a little bit more complicated. Let me shift views a little bit. When you're looking at this side of it, because these two are level with each other, which is fine. I was able to mark the two holes for it, but it's got this funny finger pattern all the way through here. I'm not exactly sure why there's a finger pattern on that. I'm thinking what I'm probably going to end up doing, though, is just routing out this entire edge all the way around so that I can just sit internal to this. Still sit up on this edge, but just sit internal to this. If any of you guys know why they would have the fingers all the way around the edge, I would appreciate you letting me know in the comment section. But as of right now, I can't really think of a reason why they would do it. So I'm going to bypass that entirely so that I don't have to try and get this complicated profile fit to my new insert. I was actually just thinking though, one of the things that you might be able to do, if you have access to get to the inside of your table saw, you might be able to pop off whatever panel you have, put your blank in, and then trace some of these things out from the inside so that you have a pattern that you're looking for. But once we have the patterns marked out on our board, I need to measure the depth or the thickness of this guy right here so that I know how much I need to leave left, because I'm going to take my router, go through these different profiles, and I need to know how much material I need to retain on the opposite side. And it looks like we're sitting at about 1/8 of an inch thick for that one right there. So once everything's marked, I went ahead and I'm going to be using my my 3/8 inch up spiral bit on my router, and then I'm just going to slowly go through and work it out. Again, these don't need to be exact profiles because we're basically just trying to clear enough space for that foot. Okay, so I want to stop it here real fast so I can talk through one of the steps that I just did. So this one was pretty easy. We're just getting it down to the thickness that we need all the way for these two lips. For the through holes right here, when you do a little bit of blue tape on the other side, you can prevent a lot of bad splintering, but you can see that there's still a little bit, or maybe you can't see, it's still a little bit proud right there. For the Forstner bit to get this 3/4 inch hole in, which you can use any size hole you want. This is about the size of my finger and it was a 3/4 inch. Putting or clamping it to another piece of wood or this sacrificial 2x4 over here really helps, because then when you punch through the opposite side, it's all supported all the way around. And you can see that I just went until I saw a little bit of the 2x4 coming out, and this turned out really, really nice. This guy will need to chamfer a little bit. For this, in order to get this entire edge profiled correctly, this one I could just kind of eyeball a little bit, and you can see it's a little bit sloppy. You could get a little bit nicer with that. But on this one, I'm going to be using this tool right here. I can't actually remember what the name of the tool is. This tool is right off the top of my head. I'll make sure I post it right here. But I'm going to use this to get to the outer radius all the way around here, and then I measured that it is about 5/8 of an inch in from the outside on the table saw for those fingers. And so I'll just put a small scribe mark all the way around so that I can come in, follow that scribe line all the way around, and then go ahead and route that out. Alrighty, so a little bit overzealous with the cut on this side. I got a little bit lost as I was coming across this other side for where I was supposed to stop. So if you don't want to do that, mark where you're supposed to stop. Don't make the mistakes that I made. But overall, this seems to work pretty well. This isn't really all that flimsy, especially when I've got the rest of the wood supporting it. So now let's go do a test fit and see if I got all of my spacing right. It's possible I may need to take this down just a hair further, or I may need to take some of these in so that they don't interfere, but we will see. So in classic me fashion, I forgot that there is a lip actually all the way around the outside edge. So I'm going to go ahead and take a teeny tiny bit all the way around the outside of the rest of this so that the rest of this can actually sit on that shelf. So there is a teeny tiny hang up on this edge right here, which is catching up on this lip. So I'm going to just widen this guy out a little bit. And turns out that mistake I made by going a little bit too far on this side wasn't actually a mistake. It was a feature, because I was about to do that anyways. All right, third time is the charm, the right direction. Still not enough material off. Alrighty, fourth time's the charm. Fifth time. So it works. I just can't quite get it down all the way because my table saw is sitting up too high. So to make sure that I actually have a good fit on this, I'm going to go ahead and take this over to the miter saw real fast. Well, I'm going to set it in here, press it down so that I can see where the teeth are coming into the throat plate, and then I'm going to take it over to the miter saw and just give it a small groove so that I have the ability to actually set it down all the way. Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and get that done, and I'll be right back. Actually, just kidding on the miter saw, I'm going to end up using my router so I can just put a small enough groove in here because there is a dado stack that's going to be going through here. So the little tiny groove that I'm going to put in isn't going to matter. So I'm just going to put a little bit in through this, and then the dado stack is going to cut out the rest. Alrighty, now after adding that groove in, everything fits fine. So there's a little bit of fine tuning that I'm going to need to do around this corner right here, and I think this corner up here because they're still rubbing just a little bit, but I'm just going to use this little tiny sander so that I can just take off a teeny tiny bit of material. But otherwise it fits and it looks great and it's super stable. I'm not really worried about it at all. Okay, last step here is the most important step as you're going through it, or one of the most important steps. So right now it sits just underneath the surface all the way across, and the problem that you can run into with that is if I run a board up against this, it can jam and get stuck. And so I want this board to sit perfectly flush all the way around, but I don't want to have to adjust the different screws that are in here. So I learned this beautiful trick the other day where we're going to put blue tape on each one of these, put a dab of hot glue on each one of them, and then we're just going to set this on top. We're going to put a straight edge all the way across the top so that it gets flush. It's going to dry in like 3 or 4 seconds. You'll pull it off, pull the blue tape, and then it is perfectly good and ready to go. Okay, watch that. And there you go, perfectly leveled. Well guys, that's really it. And it's not really much more complicated than that. You may have a little bit more sanding or finagling to try and get it to fit right. And remember, you really do want this to be a tight fit, and so err on the side of oversizing it a hair and then slowly working your way back. The other thing is I actually went over on my thickness, or I was too thin on that little tiny lip all the way around. I don't really like how thin it is, but it seems to be working fine right now. We'll see how it works as I get into the future. And then the last thing that you're gonna wanna do if you're putting this in for a new blade is to actually run your blade through it. And I'm gonna show you guys how to do that in the next video that I put out because I'm gonna be unboxing my new dado set and showing you guys how to use that, how it looks, how it works, all that good stuff. And then I will go ahead and initialize this new throat plate there. But if you don't have one of the nice phenolic ones in stock, or plastic, I think it's phenolic, that they have, that Leecraft has for your table saw, you can make one pretty quickly. It just took me the morning and now I've got a new one, and so I would do this for more than just this plate. And if you happen to have a CNC router on hand, you should be able to do this in an absolute flash. It should be super, super easy to get that done. But all sorts of different options. I'm really happy with the way that this turned out, and I'm going to be doing this more in the future, especially if I can't get one from Leecraft. And if you want to save some money, do it like this, because right now I could buy one for like 30 bucks if they were in stock. It'd be like $30, $35, and then shipping on top of that. This was just, I mean, essentially scrap from plywood that I have around the shop, which by itself is not cheap, but it's also not half a sheet of plywood. So right now, that's where lumber prices are sitting, like 60 bucks for a half-inch 4 foot by 8 foot sheet of plywood. So definitely cheaper than that. But hope you guys learned something. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave it in the comment section down below. If you like the kind of content we're producing here at Northwest Craftsman, we'd love a thumbs up and a subscription to the channel. And I hope that we have earned your subscription with the type of videos that we're putting out and in this video itself. So thank you guys very much. I really appreciate having you around, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a great one. Happy woodworking. Bye.